Imagine sitting in a room where the air suddenly turns, well, heavy.
Right. Like the pressure just drops.
Maybe it's a sterile, fluorescent-lit corporate boardroom, or, maybe it's a dinner table surrounded by extended family, and the clatter of silverware suddenly goes completely quiet.
Or just you and a partner in the supposed safety of your living room.
Yeah, and someone looks across the space at you, the temperature drops, and they throw a sly, venomous accusation your way.
Just right at you.
Right. They question your competence, they challenge your integrity, or they just casually drape this heavy blanket of guilt right over your shoulders. Welcome to topikia, inner clarity.
You can feel the physiological shift before you even process the words. I mean, the pulse spikes.
Oh, absolutely.
The amygdala, that's the brain's threat detection center. It immediately sounds the alarm. A flush of heat rises in your chest, creeping up the back of your neck.
And your mind just accelerates to 1,000,000 miles an hour. And the immediate, overwhelming, almost biological instinct is to just open your mouth.
To fix it.
Yes. You feel this burning, desperate urge to speak, to correct the record, to defend your character, to explain what you really meant so they can see they just have it all wrong.
But here's the thing. In this deep dive, we're stepping into a space that requires a rather uncomfortable level of psychological honesty.
Yeah, we're looking at a deeply ingrained habit that almost every single one of us relies on for survival. And, well, we are going to completely dismantle it today.
Because the research we're analyzing today presents a rather ruthless truth. It draws on the pragmatic, highly observant philosophy of Niccolò Machiavelli to propose that the moment you open your mouth to defend yourself, you've already lost.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It really is. The weak rush to explain. The dangerous and the truly powerful, they remain silent.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the architecture of that silence. We're going to unpack the Machiavellian rules of perception control, detailing exactly why explaining yourself is a psychological trap.
And we'll look at how strategic silence acts as a nonviolent but highly effective form of psychological leverage.
Right. And we'll outline the exact tactical steps you can take to flip the power dynamic in any room without lifting a single finger.
To stop explaining yourself, you really have to understand the invisible engine driving that impulse in the first place.
Where does it even come from?
Well, if we look at the developmental psychology outlined in the research, this overwhelming urge to over-explain, it doesn't start in the boardroom. It starts when you're like 4 or 5 years old.
Right, because nobody is born justifying their right to just take up space.
Exactly. Think about the power dynamic of childhood. When you were accused of something by an authority figure, a parent, a teacher, your actual physical survival, your access to comfort, food, safety, it depended entirely on explaining your innocence.
I didn't break the vase, the dog knocked it over.
Right. Or, I didn't hit my brother, he pushed me first. We learned at a highly impressionable age that authority figures hold the absolute power of judgment.
And to a child, a parent is essentially a god.
Exactly. And our well-being depended on convincing that god that we were good, that we were compliant, and worthy of protection.
So we basically hardwired our developing brains to equate explanation with physical and emotional safety. It's essentially a survival mechanism.
It's a deeply embedded survival mechanism. The issue, as the research astutely points out, is that while our physical bodies matured, paid taxes, navigated the adult world, that specific psychological reflex remained completely frozen in time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. As adults, we walk around subconsciously projecting that omnipotent authority figure onto everyone we meet.
We project it onto our managers, our romantic partners.
Random strangers leaving comments on the internet.
Yes. And even our active opponents. It's like we're carrying around this highly punitive metaphorical courtroom inside our own heads.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Every single time someone questions us or doubts us or throws a critique our way, we instinctively walk ourselves right up to the witness stand.
We sit down, swear on a hypothetical Bible, and start begging the judge.
Whoever happens to be standing in front of us at that moment.
Right, begging them for permission to be seen as a good person. We submit our evidence. We bring up past good deeds. We frantically plead our case.
And we do this entirely blind to the invisible signal we're actually broadcasting. When you rush to the witness stand, you are subconsciously signaling to the other person, you are the judge, I am the subordinate, please accept my plea so I can feel safe again.
And human beings are highly attuned social primates, We can detect that scent of submission instantly.
We really can.
When you rush to defend yourself, you're prioritizing being understood over being respected. You are loudly signaling that your internal stability depends entirely on their external validation.
Okay, but I'm struggling a bit with this line between submission and just, well, basic human decency.
How so?
I mean, if my partner or colleague comes to me and says, hey, what you did really hurt me, or I'm confused by this decision and I just refuse to explain my side, I'm not being powerful, I'm just being toxic, right? Doesn't a total refusal to explain destroy the foundation of a relationship?
That is the crucial gray area, and the research makes a very sharp distinction here between communication and justification.
Okay, lay that out for me.
Healthy, vulnerable communication is absolutely essential, but it's reserved for your allies. It's for people who have earned your trust, people who approach you in good faith with a genuine goal of mutual understanding.
So it's completely about the intention behind their approach.
Precisely. In a power dynamic, when someone is challenging you, attempting to dominate the social space, or throwing an accusation designed to unbalance you, an explanation is not communication.
What is it?
An explanation is a disguised apology. Power does not seek permission. The moment you justify your actions to someone who is attacking you, you hand them the gavel.
Wow. You give them the key to your internal house.
Exactly. And once they have that key, they can walk in and rearrange your emotional furniture whenever they please.
That brings us to this fascinating concept in the research, the frame.
Yes, the frame.
It's basically the invisible battlefield where all social interactions take place. When someone throws an accusation at you, they are essentially drawing a box around the conversation.
They're establishing the rules of reality for that specific moment.
Right. So if someone says, you are being completely irrational about this project, they've built a frame where your rationality is the subject on trial.
And when you respond by saying, no, I'm not being irrational, let me explain the data.
Yeah.
You have willingly stepped into their box.
You accepted their reality.
You did.
Yeah.
You're no longer leading the interaction. You are entirely reactive. You're playing the game by their rules on their turf.
So in the Machiavellian view, even if you win the argument on a purely factual level,
even if your explanation is perfectly logical, brilliantly structured, and undeniably true,
you still lose.
you still lose. Because the very act of mounting a defense makes you look like a defendant. It makes you look like you felt the need to defend yourself in the first place.
Which implies weakness.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of this in a real-world application, what the research refers to as the social kill shot.
The social kill shot. I love that term.
It's intense. Imagine a high-stakes corporate scenario. A CEO is in a boardroom delivering a presentation on a new quarterly direction.
Okay, setting the scene.
Suddenly, a senior manager, perhaps looking to, score political points or test the waters of a power grab, speaks up in front of the entire board and says, with all due respect, I think your strategy is reckless, and ignores the market data.
Oof. That is a direct ambush, a blatant attempt to seize the frame and assert dominance in front of an audience.
It is a deliberate provocation. Now, the biological response we discussed earlier kicks in. The pulse spikes.
The amygdala is screaming.
Right. The average person in that scenario leans forward over the table. They start talking slightly faster. The pitch of their voice raises a fraction of an octave.
They pull up a previous PowerPoint slide.
Yes. They start rambling through data points, trying to logically prove that the strategy is not reckless.
And while they're doing all that explaining, the whole room is watching the CEO react to a subordinate. The CEO is on the witness stand, and the subordinate is sitting in the judge's chair.
But the Machiavellian operator handles this entirely differently. The research breaks down the physical and verbal mechanics.
What do?
The CEO does not lean forward. They lean back, physically expanding their space. They do not raise their voice. They hold unbroken eye contact with the attacker, allowing a long, incredibly heavy pause to fill the room.
Just letting it hang there.
And then calmly they say, interesting, walk us through your strategy.
Oh, that is a complete reversal of the energetic flow.
Total reversal.
The CEO completely ignored the invitation to defend the strategy. They refused the frame. Instead, they took the intense, aggressive spotlight that was pointed at them and smoothly tilted it right back onto the person who turned it on.
And consider the psychological weight of that shift. The attacker was prepared for defense. They had counter-arguments lined up for a debate.
But they are rarely prepared to instantly present a flawless, comprehensive strategy of their own.
Exactly. They stumble. Their bravado collapses under the sudden pressure of the room's expectation. They start mumbling, backpedaling, looking around for political support that suddenly vanishes.
So the CEO didn't win by arguing facts. They won by shifting the burden of proof and maintaining absolute control of the frame.
That dynamic is incredibly clear in a boardroom, but the research notes that this is arguably even more powerful and much harder to execute in our personal and romantic lives.
Because the emotional stakes are exponentially higher, right? Which means the amygdala hijack is that much stronger.
It requires immense emotional discipline. Let's say a partner throws out an emotional trap during a heated disagreement. They say, "You just don't care about me anymore. You're completely checked out."
Ouch. And the childhood terror of the judge condemning us flares up immediately.
The instinct is to frantically list all your recent good deeds. What do you mean? I just took you out to dinner. I spent all weekend helping you with your family. I always ask about your day.
You think you're proving your love. You think you're calming the storm by providing evidence to the contrary.
But you're actually validating the emotional frame of the accusation.
You're subconsciously agreeing to the premise. You have the right to put my care on trial, and I must now present evidence to soothe your insecurity.
You've surrendered the emotional tempo of the relationship. The Machiavellian response at a personal dynamic is incredibly grounded.
What does that look like?
It requires looking them in the eyes, remaining entirely calm, not cold, but untethered from their emotional chaos, and saying, "That's not how I see it, period."
That's not how I see it.
No further defense, no frantic listing of romantic receipts.
It just hangs there in the air.
It's highly disruptive to their expectation. When you deliver a boundary like that, you take control of the emotional tempo.
Because the other person launched a dramatic escalation, expecting you to catch it and escalate with them.
Exactly. When they hit a wall of calm certainty instead, they are forced to confront their own tone. They have to sit with the jarring echo of their own dramatic statement.
The person who controls the tempo controls the frame.
Always.
So, if explaining ourselves is a trap and leaning into the defense is a guaranteed forfeiture of power, we have to look at the alternative. How do we actually respond when the room turns against us or when the accusation is hanging in the air?
The research points to a tool that is culturally misunderstood, but psychologically devastating. Silence.
We are so conditioned to view silence as a void. We see it as an awkwardness that must be filled, a failure of conversation, or worse, a sign of weakness and guilt.
But strategic silence is not an absence. It is an active, highly pressurized force.
Let's look at the mechanics of this. Imagine the physical properties of a vacuum. If you pump all the air out of a chamber, the pressure from the outside atmosphere wants to crush it.
The human brain reacts to conversational silence the exact same way. The research dives into the neuroscience here. The human brain utterly despises ambiguity.
It's a prediction machine.
Yes. It constantly seeks patterns, closure, and cause and effect loops. When someone attacks you, they are initiating a specific dopamine loop. They expect resistance.
If they push you, they expect you to push back.
Or they expect you to crumble and apologize. Either reaction validates their aggression. It proves their attack had an impact.
But when they hurl an accusation and you offer complete, unbothered, total stillness, you deny them the closure their brain is demanding.
You create a psychological vacuum.
They threw a punch expecting to hit a brick wall, but instead they swung into thin air. The momentum of their own swing pulls them completely off balance.
That is the exact physiological sensation. The energy they projected doesn't land on you. It has nowhere to go but back onto them.
And in that vacuum of silence, cognitive dissonance takes over.
The attacker becomes intensely uncomfortable with the lack of reaction. They start to hear the aggressive echo of their own words in the quiet room. Because their brain is desperate to resolve the tension, they begin to overcompensate.
They start filling the silence for you.
Exactly. They might backpedal and soften their tone, or they might repeat themselves louder, frantically trying to force the reaction they originally wanted.
And eventually, under that harsh, unblinking spotlight of your silent observation, they often just self-destruct.
They reveal their own insecurities and emotional instability without you ever having to point it out.
There is a specific technique outlined in the research that utilizes this dynamic beautifully called fogging.
Fogging. It's brilliant.
I want to explore this because it shifts from absolute silence to a verbal redirection. Imagine you throw a heavy stone with all your might. You expect a loud, satisfying crash when it hits something solid.
But instead, you're throwing that stone into a dense, infinite bank of fog.
The stone enters the fog and simply vanishes. No thud, no crash. No resistance.
Fogging is the art of agreeing with the factual truth of a statement while entirely rejecting the emotional shame the attacker is trying to attach to it. It is conversational Aikido.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that. Suppose a colleague is trying to undermine you in a meeting. They look at you in front of the team and say, "You completely messed up this quarterly report. You are incredibly incompetent."
The inner child, the amygdala, instantly wants to scream, "I am not incompetent. The data you gave me was flawed and I only had 2 hours to finish it."
Which, as we've established, validates the attack. It accepts the frame that your competence is up for debate.
Right. So instead, you employ the fog, you look at them calmly, stripping all defensive energy from your voice and say, "You're right. The report has errors. I'll correct them."
Wow, the brilliance is in what you omitted.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
completely ignore the emotional insult, the "you are incompetent" narrative. You strip the accusation of its psychological weight and simply address the undeniable factual reality.
The report has errors. That is true. I will correct them. That is also true.
By agreeing with the fact, you rob the attacker of their momentum. They were braced for an emotional argument about your professional worth. Instead, you just stepped aside and let them fall forward into the fog.
It deprives them of all their ammunition. You are effectively signaling, your emotional insult didn't even register on my radar. I only deal in objective reality.
It is incredibly disarming.
No, silence and fogging form the foundation of this mindset, but the research goes further. It outlines a surgical arsenal for handling direct attacks without ever playing defense.
It breaks down into 3 core tools of the Machiavellian operator.
These are the tactical implementations of the psychology we've been discussing. They require immense internal discipline, but when executed, they neutralize aggression almost instantly.
Let's explore these tools. Tool number 1, default mode. The research describes this as being cold and still.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
This is your baseline physical response to unprovoked aggression. When the jab lands, you do not twitch. You do not scowl. You hold unbroken, neutral eye contact for 3 to 5 seconds.
You don't blink rapidly.
You simply look at them.
Yeah.
In normal, healthy conversation, we use constant microexpressions. We nod, we smile, we break eye contact to ease tension. These are social lubricants.
Right. We do it constantly to make other people feel comfortable.
We do. Default mode deliberately withholds all of those social lubricants. By remaining perfectly still, you force the other person to carry the entire awkward weight of the silence they just created.
You become a mirror, reflecting their hostility back at them without absorbing a drop of it.
Exactly.
But I want to challenge this because in a modern corporate environment, or even in a social setting, holding a dead, unblinking stare for 5 seconds can cross the line from composed to deeply unsettling or even aggressive. How do we balance this without looking like an absolute sociopath?
It's a vital distinction. The goal is not a glaring, aggressive stare. It is a relaxed, unbothered observation. Think of it as looking through them rather than at them.
Okay, looking through them.
Your facial muscles are relaxed. Your breathing is slow. It isn't a stare down meant to intimidate. It's a pause meant to communicate, "Are you quite finished?" It's the physical embodiment of amused patience.
That makes sense. It's the difference between a predator ready to pounce and someone who just isn't threatened by the noise.
Precisely.
But what if the accusation isn't just a factual error? What if the attack is so wild, so absurd or damaging, that staying silent might actually make everyone in the room think it's true?
That is exactly where tool number 2 comes into play. Deflection, or the Aikido of conversation. Sometimes absolute silence isn't the right strategic move.
Because if an accusation is utterly absurd, earnestly defending yourself actually validates the absurdity.
It tells the room, this charge is serious enough that it warrants my energy. The Machiavellian move here is to agree and amplify.
The research uses this fantastic, slightly ridiculous example of Scrooge McDuck. Let's say someone in your social circle is trying to insult you, trying to paint you as selfish, and they say, "You are so obsessed with money, you're incredibly greedy."
The weak defensive response is, "No, I'm not. I just want to provide for my family, and I donated to charity last month."
Which is boring, predictable, and immediately puts you on the defensive.
Exactly. The deflection, the agree and amplify technique requires you to lean so far into the absurdity of the accusation that you destroy the frame entirely.
You look at them with a completely deadpan expression, maybe a slight smirk, and say, "You caught me. I actually swim in a giant vault of gold coins every Tuesday like Scrooge McDuck. It's terrible for my lumbar spine."
It's a brilliant psychological maneuver. You take the knife they just threw at you, and you casually use it to peel an apple.
I love that visual.
You actively refuse to be insulted. You demonstrate that you are so completely secure in who you are that you can openly mock the tiny little box they're trying to shove you into. You dissolve their attack with a psychological posture known as amused mastery.
Amused mastery, that is a phenomenal term.
It's the attitude of a calm adult watching a toddler throw a tantrum in a supermarket. You don't get angry at the toddler. You don't start screaming back. You're just mildly amused by the theatricality of it because you know your reality is entirely safe.
That brings us to tool number 3, precision. These are lethal, cut-short phrases.
When you must speak, and neither silence nor deflection is appropriate for the context, you use precision. The rule is absolute economy of words. You say vastly less than necessary.
The research lists these incredible cold closures. Someone throws a complex, emotionally loaded accusation at you, waiting for you to unravel, and you just look at them and say, noted.
Or think what you like.
Or, strange that confidence makes people uncomfortable.
Or my personal favorite, I don't owe you authenticity.
Notice the architecture of these phrases. They are not defenses. They contain zero justification. They are pure status assertions.
They end the scene, immediately and violently close the door on any further debate. When you simply say, noted, you are acknowledging that a sound came out of their mouth, but you are categorically rejecting the requirement to engage with the content.
You're telling them, I hear you and I'm dismissing you.
Exactly.
I don't owe you authenticity. That one strikes a nerve because modern society constantly preaches the opposite. We are told we owe everyone our transparent, authentic, vulnerable selves at all times.
But the Machiavellian operator says, no, my inner world is a fortified castle, and you haven't earned the right to lower the drawbridge.
Which perfectly transitions us to the broader long-term implications of these tools. Using silence, deflection, and precision doesn't just help you win individual skirmishes in a boardroom or a living room.
Over time, consistently applying these tools fundamentally alters how the world perceives you. It elevates your standard reputation into something much more mysterious and powerful, an aura.
The research makes a deeply compelling argument here. Predictability is a prison. We live in a culture of radical oversharing. Share your truth. Be an open book. Let everyone see your messy struggles.
But the Machiavellian perspective warns that giving people the full, detailed map of your mind makes you incredibly easy to manipulate.
Transparency is a fundamental vulnerability.
If you're an open book, your enemies, and frankly even your friends, know exactly what triggers you. They know what makes you angry, what makes you feel insecure, what specific words will send you into a defensive spiral.
You become a biological machine with levers that anyone can pull.
But the unreadable person cannot be mapped. When you withhold your reactions, when you refuse to explain your motives, you deny people the data points they need to control you.
The research brings up the cultural archetype of Michael Corleone in The Godfather to illustrate this aura. Think about how he moves through the world. His enemies are loud, they shout, they throw tantrums, they meticulously explain their grand plans, they argue over petty slights.
And Michael just sits there. He listens. His face is an absolute mask.
And because he says so little, his enemies are forced to guess what he is thinking.
This leverages a universal law of human psychology. When you leave gaps in your narrative, the human mind will inevitably fill them in. Because our brains are wired for survival and threat detection, people usually fill those silent gaps with assumptions of hidden strength, tactical foresight, and danger.
By remaining unreadable, you force others to mythologize you. They assume you're playing 4D chess simply because you aren't explaining your current move.
You're outsourcing the creation of your legend to the very people trying to bring you down. It's a masterpiece of efficiency. And the research highlights a fascinating phenomenon regarding how crowds react to this kind of aura.
The paradox of the crowd. It is truly remarkable to observe in real time. Have you ever noticed that the more frantically you defend yourself in a public setting, the more isolated you begin to look?
Oh, definitely. When you're loudly shouting your innocence, the crowd naturally takes a step back. They think, well, they're handling their own defense, and they look rather desperate doing it. Let's see how this plays out.
But if you stand utterly unfazed under an attack.
Precisely. If someone is launching a massive theatrical tirade against you in a meeting or a social gathering, and you just stand there, calm, silent, perhaps sporting a look of mild boredom, the crowd gets deeply uncomfortable.
The asymmetry of the situation feels instinctively wrong to them.
The attacker looks unhinged, emotional, and out of control. You look untouched, grounded, and sovereign. And eventually, the social tension breaks, and someone else in the crowd will step in and defend you for free.
Someone will inevitably say, hey, I think that was uncalled for, or why are you coming after them like that? Let's look at the actual numbers.
By doing absolutely nothing, you gain an entire, silent army fighting your battles for you. You recruit fierce defenders through your sheer undeniable refusal to defend yourself. You don't expend a single drop of energy, yet your status in the room skyrockets.
But let's explore the gray area here, because building and maintaining this aura cannot be easy. If you are constantly filtering your reactions, constantly withholding, constantly playing the unreadable operator, doesn't that take a massive psychological toll? It sounds incredibly lonely.
It's a valid concern, and it goes back to the distinction we made earlier between allies and power dynamics. The Machiavellian aura is armor.
Right.
You do not wear your armor to bed, and you do not wear it around the fire with your trusted circle. You wear it on the battlefield. The toll comes when people forget how to take the armor off.
True power isn't about being a stone wall permanently.
No, it's about having the absolute autonomy to choose who gets to see your vulnerability rather than having it extracted from you by an attacker.
That's a crucial distinction. It's about conscious selection, not permanent isolation. And part of maintaining that armor, that mythic aura, involves managing the most valuable currency you possess. It isn't your money, it isn't your job title, it is your attention.
In the Machiavellian framework, your attention is your gold. It is a finite, highly precious, non-renewable resource. Every single time you engage in drama, every time you fire back a reply to a hater online, every time you sit down and try to logically justify your life choices to a toxic family member, you are spending your gold.
You're taking your high-stakes investment capital and pouring it into a bankrupt stock.
You're transferring your life force to someone who offers zero return on investment. To counter this, the research introduces the concept of calculated inaction, the art of winning by doing absolutely nothing.
I want to clarify this because calculated inaction sounds suspiciously like ghosting. And culturally, we view ghosting as incredibly immature.
They are fundamentally different. Ghosting is generally an act of cowardice. It's a complete panicked vanishing to avoid the discomfort of difficult communication. Calculated inaction is a strategic, deliberate withdrawal.
You don't necessarily disappear from the face of the earth.
Right, you withdraw your presence specifically and strategically. You make your attention scarce so that when you do bestow it, it is highly valued. It is about deeply understanding that your presence is a privilege to be earned, not a basic right to be demanded.
The research is very specific about the mechanics of this withdrawal, breaking down 3 specific types of people, 3 unworthy archetypes, that you must actively erase from your cognitive load through chilling, absolute indifference. Let's walk through them. Number 1, enemies.
Enemies. These are the individuals actively working against your interests. They're spreading rumors, trying to sabotage your projects, or attempting to poison your reputation.
The immediate fiery instinct is to expose them. You want to drag them into the light, fight them publicly, and show the world how terrible they are.
But the research advises the exact opposite. Do not expose them. Do not fight them. Fighting them validates them. It acknowledges them as a worthy opponent on your level.
By fighting them, you invite them onto your stage.
Exactly. Instead, you erase them. Let your ongoing, untouchable success be their psychological torture. They want to see you bleed. Show them that they do not even exist in your reality.
When someone is desperate to destroy you, nothing is more agonizing than realizing you haven't even noticed them.
The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference.
Okay, archetype number 2. Critics.
Critics are the bystanders. They are the people who produce absolutely nothing of value themselves, but sit comfortably in the cheap seats, critiquing those who are actually in the arena.
And critics feed entirely on your reaction.
If you respond to a critic, even to logically disprove them, you validate their critique. You give their words weight and oxygen. Without your reaction, a critic has no purpose. They're just shouting into a void. Starve them of oxygen by refusing to acknowledge their noise.
And finally, the most insidious archetype of the 3. Energy parasites, often referred to as vampires.
These are often the hardest to erase because they camouflage themselves as friends or loved ones. These are the people who constantly have crises. They always need a shoulder to cry on. They constantly ask for advice they never take, and they drain your emotional bandwidth day after grueling day.
You give them your gold, and they pour it straight down a bottomless drain.
Everyone listening knows exactly who this is in their life. You see their name pop up on your phone screen, and your body instantly feels heavy and exhausted.
With energy parasites, you must set cold, impenetrable boundaries. You stop responding immediately. You stop offering elaborate solutions to their manufactured problems. You ruthlessly withdraw the emotional supply they are feeding on.
Now, they will try to make you feel guilty. They will inevitably accuse you of being a bad friend or being selfish. But you must remember the core Machiavellian principle. Protecting your energy isn't selfish. It is pure survival.
You cannot build your own empire or even just maintain your own peace if you're constantly bleeding out to sustain someone else's dysfunction. If we take a massive step back and look at everything we've explored today, we've traced the urge to explain back to our childhood survival instincts. We've mapped the invisible trap of the conversational frame.
We've looked at the pressurized vacuum of silence, the surgical tools of the operator,
The burden and power of the aura, and the ruthless economics of human attention. When you synthesize all of this, what is the ultimate endgame?
The ultimate goal of the Machiavellian mindset, as outlined in this research, is not actually about fighting back. It is not about winning every petty argument or crushing your enemies in spectacular cinematic fashion.
What is it then?
The final, highest evolution of this philosophy is immunity.
Immunity.
It is reaching a state of absolute psychological sovereignty where your mere existence becomes your defense. You no longer live in a state of frantic reaction, always waiting for the next accusation to dodge, the next critique to diffuse, the next misunderstanding to clarify.
So you live in a state of definition.
You define your own reality. You define your own worth. And when the attacks come, and because human nature is what it is, they will always come. They simply evaporate before they even make contact because you have cultivated an internal architecture that simply refuses to absorb them.
You become the dense fog bank. The stone is thrown with lethal intent, and it just vanishes into the white without a sound.
Exactly. You become untouchable, not because you have memorized the sharpest arguments, but because you've completely removed the targets your opponents are desperately trying to hit. Your ego, your childhood need for validation, and your deep-seated fear of being misunderstood.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that visceral feeling in the room. The sudden drop in temperature, the pulse spiking, the heat rising in your neck, the desperate burning urge to open your mouth, step onto the witness stand and explain yourself. I want you to think about that specific feeling. Hold on to it for a second.
And as you sit with that feeling, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We have talked extensively about how to handle the attacks of others. But consider what happens when you finally stop explaining yourself to yourself.
What do you mean by that?
When you remove the endless inner monologue of justification, when you stop trying to convince the internal judge that you are worthy, you are left with pure silence. And in that silence, you finally have to meet the person you actually are, stripped of all excuses and defenses. What if the very next time someone blatantly misunderstands you, you simply let them?
Just let them be wrong.
Yes. And more importantly, what kind of terrifying, unshakable power would you discover in the vast empty space where your excuses used to be?
Meeting yourself in the silence, that is a thought worth sitting with. Thank you for sharing your most valuable currency or attention with us today, and for stepping into the fog. We ask you to subscribe and join Topikia Inner Clarity for our next deep dive into the hidden mechanics of human nature.